Welcome to the Love Dog Podcast, Episode 2. I'm your co-host, Raina Butcher, with our host, Dr. Sarah Hensley.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Dr. Sarah Hensley. I'm a specialized social psychologist who's been studying the science of attachment and attraction for over 15 years, and I am here to answer all of your burning relationship questions.
Well, I'm really excited about this episode.
Oh, me too.
Because it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
So the topic of this episode is the subconscious mind.
Yes.
Which really intrigues a lot of people, including me. So I think to start out, just tell us what the subconscious mind is, the science behind it, and really how it works.
Mm-hmm. So we have different levels of the mind. We have the conscious mind, which we have access to. Mm-hmm. We can pull up, thoughts in the conscious mind. We know it's there. It's a full level of awareness. We have the subconscious mind, which is part of our mind that's not completely accessible, but it influences like 90% of our behavior. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of crazy, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have the unconscious mind, which is completely non-accessible, but it doesn't influence that much of our behavior. So the subconscious is really in the driver's seat in our lives. Mm-hmm. And it's so fascinating that people don't know a lot about it, especially how to hack it, since it does control so much of our lives.
Right. And that's a lot of what you do in your practice, right? You teach people how to hack it.
Absolutely.
Which is something that takes a lot of consistency.
It does.
It's something that requires a large commitment.
Yes.
Because accessing the conscious mind specifically during conflict is the hard part.
That's right. And that's what you need to do to be a securely attached person. You have to remain a conscious individual instead of allowing those primitive subconscious drives that are coming from wounds that live in the subconscious, or negative imprints, as some people call them, are really driving people's behavior. But when you can learn to sort of tell the subconscious, hold up, back up, take a back seat, I'm a conscious person. And we do that by keeping our nervous system in a calm state. When we learn to calm our nervous system, our conscious mind comes online fully. And so that's really the key. The nervous system is really that connection piece.
So let's start from the beginning, right? Like from childhood, and really how the subconscious mind forms, and then what happens into adulthood as we start forming these intimate relationships.
Sure. So when we're young children, our subconscious is kind of a blank slate. And the subconscious doesn't really care what messages you give it. The messages just have to be on repeat enough times for the subconscious to sort of take hold of that message and allow it to live there and grow there. So it doesn't care if the messages are hurtful or helpful. Whatever has been on repeat is what it will take in, right? And so who are the people that we interact with the most when our subconscious is a blank slate that give us messages about what it means to be us and what it means to be close to someone? It's our parents, right? And so
God love them.
Bless them. Bless their heart. All we can do is pray for them.
Right. And love them through it, right? Because, even now as we're parents, we're not doing everything right.
No.
And I know, my parents loved me so unconditionally.
Of course.
But, yes, they made mistakes. They definitely made mistakes. And I don't think... I think it was you the other day that I was saying, I didn't really even recognize that my parents were human beings until I was an adult myself.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh, my parents must have been experiencing this source of stress or been dealing with these issues. And you can see it from an adult perspective, right? But as children have what we call schemas, which are just this sort of mental paradigm around what is the child-parent relationship supposed to look like? And so a little child's schema is like, well, parents are supposed to be your safe place. They're supposed to love you unconditionally. They're supposed to meet your needs. They're supposed to show up for you. They're supposed to protect you. But then when parents have their own struggles or their own lack of capacity to give love in a healthy way, it hurts us. It affects us. And those imprints stay with us. And that's very unfortunate because we don't even know those messages are being put there, let alone being carried with us into adulthood, right? And that they're going to play out inside our adult romantic relationships.
And it also fascinates me that people don't really think about the subconscious mind and how it plays a role really ever. I mean, and I know this just from my experience in coaching in your practice. It's like the subconscious mind is so foreign to people.
Yeah.
When if this was something that we were taught,
oh yeah,
like early on, so that we could have the understanding of it, think about how much more levels of consciousness we would have as we go into our adult relationships.
For sure.
Because we would have more understanding.
Yeah, and we would have more control of what we allowed to grow there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so the subconscious mind, again, it doesn't care what you give it. Mm-hmm. It's not like, oh, those are really negative and hurtful things. We're not going to believe those things. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, well, we've heard that enough times. It must be true.
Right.
Or we've seen that enough times. It must be true. So
it's neurological. It's
neurological.
Right.
It is neurological. Mm-hmm. So it's housed in the limbic system of the brain, which is our emotional center of the brain. So we sort of have 3 levels of the brain. We have the hindbrain, which is there's structures like the pons, the cerebellum, our spinal cord, all of those things that are really, there are structures that help our automatic functions like breathing and sleeping and that kind of stuff, balance. And then we have the midbrain, and the midbrain is like the lizard brain. It's the animalistic brain. It houses emotion and affect and motivation and accesses parts of memory. And it acts as a prediction mechanism for what is about to happen to us, right, based on all of our past experiences. And so that's where the subconscious lives. Then we have the forebrain, which is primarily comprised of the prefrontal cortex, which is the adult rational brain. It's really what differentiates us from animals, the fact that we have this really developed prefrontal cortex, and we can make rational decisions. We can learn action and consequence. We don't just operate on instinct all the time, but we actually do most of the time. Right? So because we're acting from that subconscious state within the limbic system, the basal ganglia and the hippocampus, which is adjacent to the midbrain, and certainly the amygdala, are structures that are heavily involved in processing of the subconscious and the subconscious relaying messages to us that influence our behavior. So the subconscious, again, like I said, it just takes whatever's on repeat. And then its primary function is to use the past as sort of a fodder or prediction mechanism for what is about to happen to us right now in this present moment. And its sole goal is to keep us safe.
Yeah. And
so romantic relationships become a big part of this. From an evolutionary standpoint, our subconscious mind, if its largest goal is to keep us safe and to make sure that we survive, and not just that we survive, but our genetics survive, like our children survive, right? It's really concerned with the survival of us as an individual, but of the survival of our genes and the survival of us as a species. And so whenever there's a rift in your romantic relationship, the subconscious gets real bent out of shape.
Yeah.
Because of the mating strategy that we have as humans. Where animals, most animals, not all animals, but most animals, they go out and mate with whoever, right? And it's a numbers game. Like maybe I'll make enough offspring that enough will survive and my genes will pass on and our species will continue. But humans, our mating strategy is that we form intimate bonds with other people that we stay with long term. And then we have children and we raise children inside of that unit. And everybody knows that children are most protected in a 2-parent house. I mean, the science is very clear on that. That doesn't mean that divorce sometimes isn't the right answer. But if it's a healthy 2-parent house, children have less risk of, just about every mortality risk factor out there.
Right.
And so if there's a rift in your romantic relationship, your subconscious is like, well, that's a threat to the survival of your DNA. Right? So that's a big deal. So the subconscious is sort of always looking out for, are we okay? Are we safe? Are we going to survive?
Yeah.
And when things between you and your romantic partner are not good, the subconscious really kicks in and reminds you of all of these past times that you were hurt
and felt unsafe
to try to push you into a defensive type of response, a trauma response of fight, flight, or freeze or fawn to keep you safe.
Right. So in terms of the attachment styles, let's break down how each attachment style and the subconscious mind comes into play in the midst of our romantic relationships.
Sure. So the wounds or messages that live in the subconscious are very different for each attachment style. In fact, that is how attachment forms. It forms depending upon what types of messages you were given and then now live in your subconscious and drive your behavior. So the anxious, preoccupied person usually had very inconsistent parenting, where sometimes the parents were loving and attuned and affectionate, and then other times the parents were absent or did not provide that attunement and love and affection. And so that was what we talked about last podcast about the intermittent reinforcement, which creates anxiety and addiction, which creates the wounding of fearing abandonment, because the times where parents were unavailable, it felt like an abandonment, right? And feeling not good enough. So what the child does when it receives intermittent reinforcement is the child really tries to figure out under what conditions can I receive this love? So, if I try this, if I'm like good enough in this way, if I achieve in this way, maybe I'll get love and attention. Or if I do this thing, maybe I'll get the love and attention, because it is intermittent. So the feeling of I'm not good enough and I always need to strive to try to be good enough is a huge wound of the anxious, preoccupied person.
And then that translates into the romantic relationship as just always needing that reassurance.
Always needing that reassurance that they are loved.
Yeah.
And sort of always being triggered into that fear of not being good enough. That will then lead to abandonment. For them, love is and self-worth is really associated with being in a romantic partnership. To be alone is to be abandoned and to be not worthy of love.
Oh, the APs, they're precious.
They are precious. They're warm, they're kind, they're loving, and they just want somebody to love them.
Yeah. And they don't tend to get reactive.
They're usually not, no. They're actually, the anxious preoccupied is just as scared of conflict as the dismissive avoidant. Because conflict could mean that they're abandoned, right? So they're very, very hesitant to bring up problems, and they lack boundaries in relationships, and they can end up to being doormats.
Right.
Very clingy doormats, but still doormats. The fearful avoidant, now they have the trauma. And that's what we were. We were fearful avoidants because we had childhood trauma.
Yes.
I know my mom won't love hearing that, but I mean, it is true. My dad was bipolar and very unpredictable, and there were some things that happened in my childhood that I think my parents really just brushed off of oh, well,
And that's part of that
life's tough.
That's part of that generation,
the boomers.
Yeah, they just sweep things under the rug.
Yeah, it's fine. You're fine. Life's tough. Get over it.
Yeah, rub some dirt on it. And go on.
That's right.
Yeah, because my parents were very similar.
Yeah,
especially my mother.
Yeah. So the fearful avoidant has imprints, of course, that love is not safe. People will betray you. People will always let you down. You can't trust anybody, maybe not even yourself.
Yeah.
Life is unpredictable. And so they have the betrayal wound. Because if you can't trust your own parents to show up for you, who could you ever trust?
Yeah.
So
I feel this to my core.
To my core. I know. I'm having like an ASMR reaction, having goosebumps.
And that goes with, listen, in case our parents do listen to this.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. Hey, Dad. I want them to know that this all comes from a place of love and understanding, that we understand that they were these human beings and that
did the best that they could.
No one goes through life unscathed, right? Like we all have trauma.
Yeah.
And some degrees are just higher than others.
Yeah.
So
my mom did the best that she could. My mom was a great mom.
Yeah.
She was a DA, but she was a great, she loved me and she did the best that she could. And my dad really gave her not a lot of great things to work with. So
it's funny, like our dynamics were kind of shifted.
Yeah.
Because I feel like my dad was more of the DA. And my mom was the fearful avoidant.
Yeah.
And like my dad was just absent most of the time because he had no choice but to be. And then my mom was always yelling.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah. My dad was the yeller.
Yeah.
My mom was more of the big deep sigh and just mean look on her face.
Yeah. And then disappear into the room or whatever.
To go read her book.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the FA has the betrayal wounds. They go into relationships and they're so hypervigilant. Because if you've been hurt in childhood, you develop this hypervigilance to learn how to stay safe, right? So if my dad is in a bad mood, when I got home from school, and I had to really look, is dad okay? Is dad mad right now?
Right.
Should I stay downstairs? Should I just go upstairs and hide in my room? Because if I do something, he's going to yell at me.
Right. And just feeling really emotionally responsible, for that parent. Like, if I do this, I'm going to blow up,
Yes.
Yeah, I live that
and so FAs do grow up to feel extremely responsible for other people's emotions. And they're super hypervigilant. So they can notice a look on someone's face or a tone shift or a pattern shift and they're like, oh my God, what's wrong?
Yep.
Right. What did I do? Are you okay? Are you mad at me?
I do this in my marriage still.
Donald and I do it. We're both former FAs. And then we'll have to be like, okay, I'm putting you under a microscope. I'm going to stop that right now. And I'm just going to let you have your humanity. You're allowed to be stressed out right now. That is okay. I'm here for you.
I don't have to fix everything.
I don't have to fix it. I can just be present with you as you have your humanity.
Right.
But old Sarah would have been like, what's your problem? Why are you so mad at me? What did I do? Oh my gosh, and get really defensive and get really assumptive and but that's the FA. The FAs are hypervigilant and they give deep meaning to people's behavior. And that's what's part of the pain of the FA is they're like, well, if you're stressed out, I must be part of that. Right. I must be, I'm not good enough to make you okay, right? So we really feel so deeply responsible for other people's behavior.
I'm having all these bodily reactions too when you talk about this stuff.
Yes.
Because, man, I feel this.
Yeah, and they're deep empaths.
Yeah.
They're deep empaths. And so that's a really beautiful thing, but it can also really work against them when the stories that they're telling themselves about someone's behavior take on a deep personal meaning.
Well, I definitely feel like the FAs that I coached, their nervous systems were definitely the most out of whack.
Oh, for sure. Oh, gosh.
They were the ones that had all the ailments.
Yes.
That complained of all the health issues.
For sure.
And we know that from personal experience as well.
Absolutely. That was actually a huge conversation last night in my hybrid group program. So I have several FAs in there, and they were all like, I've had all these health issues. And I'm like, listen, I had every one of those. Everything you just listed, I have had those.
Yep.
Those are a result of an overtaxed nervous system. The nervous system controls everything in the body. The brain and the spinal cord control everything. And if you are constantly exhausting it, it's going to steal energy from the immune system, from the organs, from other places. And you're going to end up with health symptoms. It is just the way that it is.
Yeah.
Stress, I think, is the number one killer.
Absolutely.
It's the number one killer. I mean,
it leads to disease.
It does. I think more people, and it's funny, you see these really old people that make it past 100, right? And they're smoke, and they're I drink 3 Diet Cokes or 3 Dr. Peppers a day, every day. I've done it for 70 years. And you're like, how are you 104 years old? You're smoking Marlboro Reds and drinking Dr. Pepper. It's because they don't care about anything. They're just whatever. It is what it is. Their nervous systems have been regulated from day one.
They've probably been drinking Dr. Pepper and bourbon.
Yeah. and it's because the fear of oh my gosh, if I drink 3 Dr. Peppers a day, I'm going to die. I'm going to be this diabetic.
That would be me.
Yeah.
That would be me.
And you're like, no. And that is the one thing that really changed for me when I healed my attachment and I broke away from fear. I used to be so crunchy, like granola mom. I would eat all organic. All of my products were natural. I was like, I'm not putting any toxins into my body. And then when I realized that the biggest thing that kept me from detoxing was my nervous system. Remember when I would go to jazzercise and I wouldn't even sweat?
No.
I wouldn't sweat. I'd go through an entire high-impact jazzercise.
Not a bead of sweat on you.
Not a bead of sweat. What do you see me now when I teach jazzercise? I'm pouring. I am drenched with sweat.
Which tells the body that your adrenal glands are healthy.
My adrenal glands are healthy. Yeah. I had nothing left of my adrenal glands before. So the FA does have all of this wounding. Their nervous systems are wrecked. They're constantly hypervigilant that they're going to be betrayed because their subconscious is constantly telling them, you're about to get hurt. You're about to get hurt. Be on guard. Be on guard. Be on guard. Be on guard. People hurt you. People let you down. People betray you. And you just go through your relationship like that. And so every little thing your partner does, you're going to be offended and triggered by that. I mean, FAs are triggered constantly.
And that's why they're the most reactive.
For sure. They have the most pain. They're the deepest feelers. They have the most wounding. Yeah, they're going to be the most reactive, right? They're going to be the yellers and the criers and the screamers and the spiteful ones and the passive-aggressive ones.
All of the above.
And the manipulative ones. And then we have the sweet, sweet, dismissive avoidant. In their subconscious mind, it's all about, emotions are just weak. Emotions are unnecessary. Life is logical.
They're uncomfortable.
There's no need for them. They're pointless because in their childhoods, their parents just raised them with that, oh, you'll be okay, quit crying, life's tough, just go out there and be responsible and achieve mentality. And so there was no room for their emotional expression at all. And they learned very, very early that emotions are not something to be proud of, not something to share. Nobody's business. Suppress them, shove them down real deep. And so their subconscious imprints in relationships are, vulnerability is not safe and intimacy is not safe and they are too distant. I mean, they come in strong because when a relationship is new, there's no expectation or pressure. But as soon as commitment starts and longevity has been there, and it's like maybe around the 4 to 6 month mark is usually when they bait and switch and they start to pull away. But eventually, with longevity, with commitment, with conflict, their wounds of I don't do emotions and vulnerability is really yucky start to pop up, and then they distance themselves and they run away from conflict and they don't solve conflict and they are not emotionally available. They dismiss the emotions of their partners just like they were dismissed as children. So, the subconscious always wins. It always wins until you learn to beat it.
Right. And so without giving away all your tips and tricks.
Well, we would be here for hours.
Right. So, what's the first step in really learning how to take control of the subconscious mind?
Yes.
And allowing the conscious mind to become the driver.
Right. So you have to understand the trigger cycle. So what happens is one of those wounds in your subconscious is triggered by your partner because your subconscious is sort of always looking at, is this thing going to happen to me again that happened to me in my childhood that caused pain, right? So for like the FA, it's like, am I about to be hurt? They just said something rude. Oh my gosh, like they hate me and this is going to go down the tubes and then, I'm going to be in pain. The subconscious is always just trying to predict what's about to happen. So you get triggered and then the subconscious doesn't have any language. It doesn't have words. So you can't speak to your subconscious and be like, you know what? Not everybody's going to betray you. You're going to be fine.
Right.
That doesn't fix the subconscious. The subconscious needs a different experience to believe something different and to grow something different within it. So, but there's this domino effect. So the trigger happens. Your subconscious creates feeling in the body because it speaks in terms of feeling or nervous system activity, right? The body is actually the subconscious. Like the feelings of the body are the subconscious mind speaking to you. And then the thoughts come in. And that's where our consciousness, our actual conscious mind starts to come online. And the thoughts usually confirm the subconscious trigger that, yes, we should be upset because our partner just did X, Y, Z. How dare they, right? I'm so mad at them. And then we have a fully realized emotional experience. So emotions are just feeling in the body combined with our thoughts about what's happening. That's all emotion is. And then emotion drives behavior. And that behavior will be in a trauma response, a defensive, self-protective, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response inside of the trigger cycle. So how do we intervene? It's a domino effect. Thoughts talk to the nervous system, which influence the development of an emotional response, and the emotional response drives behavior. So it's thoughts, emotion, behavior in that order. And so dismantling the trigger cycle and becoming a conscious person that will give you a different end result and then therefore give the subconscious a different experience to wire back in has to happen. So you have to intervene at every level. So what I teach my clients is you have to intervene at the thought level first. The very first step in becoming securely attached is to become an absolute boss of your thought world, to be extremely vigilant and conscious. Like turn your hypervigilance to your own thoughts, right? And constantly challenging them to the truth.
This is daily. This is a daily practice.
It's hourly. It's something that I tell them, like, don't wait until you're triggered to try this because it's not going to happen. You'll be your subconscious are already taken over, right? It's already taken over at that point. So, but observing and challenging your own thoughts and having this higher level of consciousness, which we call metacognition, thinking about your own thoughts, observing your own thoughts, can become automatic. It can be how you think, but you have to train yourself to think that way. So for me, it's like there's the me that has a thought, and then there's the little me on my shoulder that's like, what? What was that? Right?
Yeah.
And of course, I take a very spiritual perspective to that. I mean, I believe that my thoughts come from God or come from the enemy, and but I teach the psychological perspective that, you know, maybe your thoughts are organic from inside of you, and if that's the case, then, you know, you still have to hold them up to the truth. You have to hold them up to their own productivity and their alignment with your values. So you have to become a boss of your thought world. Most people are just like this passive victim of their thoughts.
Right. They don't give a second thought to their thoughts.
No, their thoughts come in. The thoughts speak to the nervous system, and they just believe them.
And I mean, I've been guilty of it, and still am guilty of it. Like
It's hard.
I have to acknowledge my own self-talk.
For sure.
And sometimes self-deprivation on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think that it was until probably 5 years ago that I really started thinking like, how am I speaking to myself every day?
Of course.
Like, what is my inner voice telling me when I look in the mirror?
My inner voice was mean.
Mine's still sometimes mean.
Oh, for sure. But I have learned to be like, no, not today, Satan.
Right. I don't participate.
I don't participate in that. I don't participate in that. And so I say it with authority.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like, well, I don't participate. I don't want to participate in that. It's like, Yeah. No, that was so evil. That was so ugly. You know, take that thought back to hell where it came from, Satan. I'm not participating in that in Jesus' name.
Yeah.
Of course, again, that's the spiritual side, but if people that have no faith, I'm like, well, hold your thoughts up to your own values, right? So if you feel like I am a respectful and loving person, if you're not speaking respectful and loving towards yourself or about someone else, your thoughts aren't in line with your values.
Right.
So you need to correct that, you know, misalignment and really hold your own thoughts up to who you believe that you are, because then that's how you become that person. Right.
And really the person that God always intended you to be.
For sure.
And so I find it interesting that, like, I feel like our world, or the human race in general, is on this journey of reaching these higher levels of consciousness. And, like, do you foresee, let's just say, in your lifetime, that the majority of the human race, it's never going to happen with everyone, right? That the majority of the human race can finally tap into the prefrontal cortex, and it will ultimately be the part of the brain that's in the driver's seat. Do you ever foresee that happening?
I mean, it hasn't happened so far. So, like, I don't know.
Like the human race is becoming so much more conscious.
It is. I mean, maybe it will be an evolutionary adaptation of the brain. Perhaps. I don't know. And I think that certainly, if you can train your brain to be that way, then certainly everybody's capable of it. Now, does that mean that the subconscious then plays no role? I don't think so. I just think that we are able to access more of our conscious mind, be more deliberate people, you know, have a higher sense of self, self-awareness. And man, self-awareness is just so freaking key.
Yeah, it is. It is, yeah.
To healing and to becoming a loving, respectful, patient, emotionally mature human being.
And you know, and that's really the message. It's like, you're not the healer. You're just teaching people how to heal themselves.
For sure. There's nothing I can do. But I can teach you what to do for you. And so at the end of the day, it starts with the thought world, right? But then you have to be able to train the nervous system to sort of release that energy that was created when that initial message of lack of safety first came in and stimulated the nervous system. And even if your thoughts, you didn't catch them quick enough and they went down the rabbit hole and they spoke to your nervous system telling you you're very unsafe, you have to deal with that. So getting your thoughts in line is part of transforming the emotional experience, because emotions are feelings in the body plus your thoughts. So you're on your way, but you still have to deal with the nervous system that was sent a message very quickly that things aren't okay.
Right.
You know, and you're pumping out cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine and pro-inflammatory cytokines and all the things. And so I teach something called self-neurofeedback, which we do not have time to go into that entire exercise. But the brain is so fascinating. It responds.
My gosh, it's so fascinating.
It responds to information about its own functioning. And so if you give it information that it's making the wrong decision, like it doesn't differentiate between emotional threats and physical threats, real threats and imagined threats. So most of our relationship issues are like imagined emotional threats, right?
Right.
They're just little tiffs that turn into something big, and our nervous system thinks we're getting attacked by a grizzly bear.
Right.
But we can train our nervous system to go, hey, no, this is just a small emotional disturbance, and I'm actually competent and capable of handling this. Stand down.
Right.
No grizzly bear here.
Right.
And let's release that energy. Let's release that, allowing the nervous system to come back down into its parasympathetic activation. And then our consciousness is driving our behavior then. It's like, no, I need to step back, take a breath. Because that's like the generic advice people give. It's like, step back and take a breath.
Yeah.
When you're triggered, you're not going to freaking remember to step back and take a breath.
Right. No.
That's like, that's the dumbest advice. I'm sorry. But if somebody's like, I have this rage problem and I just yell at my kids, count to 3 and take a breath.
Right.
That's not how this works.
No.
The trigger cycle happens in 0.1 second. Right? So if you haven't made stepping back and taking a breath an automatic behavior that you do all the time in your life outside of being triggered, you're not going to be able to call on that skill when you are triggered. You have to build capacity, and building capacity means that you practice these things so they become automatic behaviors. They become very ingrained so that when you are triggered, that automaticity takes over, and what's already been ingrained and practiced is still there.
Right. And then the result is a different behavior, and therefore a different experience for the subconscious mind.
Right. That rewires something different back in.
Yes.
Because most of the time, the trigger cycle, it's a huge self-fulfilling prophecy. The subconscious is the master of self-fulfilling prophecies, right? So let's just say you're the anxious, preoccupied, and you are triggered into, I'm not good enough. Right? And then you become really anxious and clingy and like trying to really beg and seek reassurance. And your partner is like really put by that, right? And they're just like, they pull away because the anxious is usually attracted to the more avoidant person that will pull away because of that.
And it puts a lot of pressure on them.
So what message are they getting back from the avoidant person? You are not good enough. I'm pulling away from you as you try to come close to me. And then they go into their, what's wrong? Like, do you still love me? Are we okay? Like, what's going on? And then the avoidant's like, right?
Even more
turned off. And then so their experience is when I get close to someone, they pull away from me and they abandon me. And so that reinforces the message back to the subconscious that everybody's going to abandon you and you are in fact not good enough to be loved.
Right.
But instead, when you learn like, okay, my more avoidant partner, my dismissive avoidant partner has taken a little space.
Right.
People are allowed to have space, and that's okay, right? I might check in with some curiosity, like, hey, is everything okay? Just checking on you. Okay, it's fine. I can soothe myself in this moment, right? Now, I'm not saying don't have boundaries, and if there's too much space that doesn't feel good to you, that you shouldn't execute your boundaries. But what I'm saying is, if you're not immediately triggered by that, if you can challenge those thoughts, first off, of like, just because he's taking a little space doesn't mean I'm unloved, right? That's how he calibrates his nervous system, is by taking space. So, if we can challenge that thought, then that leads to a different emotion of like contentment. Like, I'm actually okay.
Right.
Like, he's allowed to be human and take space, but I'm content. I can go read my book, or I'm going to take a walk, or I'm going to do whatever. And then like, you're okay. And the subconscious goes, okay, like you are good enough. You're
fine. And then your partner comes back around.
Yeah. And it's like, hey.
On their own terms.
Yes. Yes, that's right. Because you didn't smother them with your anxiety.
And there's the secret sauce, ladies and gentlemen.
We did it.
Yeah. Well, if you want to know more about Dr. Sarah Hensley's metacognition and all the wonderful things that she teaches in her practice, you can visit her website at thedatingdecoder.com. And please, if you liked this episode, we are so excited to get this project underway. Subscribe to Dr. Hensley's YouTube channel, and please like, share, and follow.
Absolutely.
And until next time.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
Yes,
today.
We have. And so please tune in for episodes to come, and we're just happy to be here and to be providing this wonderful information for you guys. And
absolutely.
So until then, love, peace, and perspective.
Yes, farewell.